The morning air felt heavy as the boy and his mother walked toward the large music academy. People rushed in and out of the tall building, talking loudly, carrying shiny instrument cases, and laughing in small groups. The boy kept his head low. He held the strap of his old bag tightly, as if it was the only thing keeping him steady. His mother gently placed her hand on his shoulder, giving him a small smile. She believed in him even when no one else did. She had spent many nights listening to him practice on a small, half-broken keyboard at home. The keys were uneven, some didn't work, and the sound wasn't right, but he played anyway. He loved music too much to stop. Inside the academy, the floors looked polished, the lights bright, and everything felt expensive. Students walked confidently, some with fancy clothes, some laughing with their friends. The boy felt out of place. His shoes were old, and his shirt was simple. But he didn't complain. He only wanted one chance, just one moment to prove what he could do. His mother walked up to the front desk and politely asked about auditions. The woman at the desk looked at the boy and raised her eyebrows slightly. She asked for their names, checked a list, and then told them to wait for the director. The boy and his mother sat on a bench near the entrance. While they waited, a group of students nearby noticed him. They started whispering to each other. Some glanced at him and laughed quietly. The boy heard them say things like, "Do you think he can even play? And maybe he's lost?" He tried to ignore it, but the voices still stung. Finally, the director walked out of his office. He was a tall man with a serious face, dressed in a clean, dark suit. His steps were slow but confident, as if he expected everyone to move aside for him. The students straightened up when they saw him. The director looked at the boy and his mother. He seemed confused at first, as if wondering why they were there. The mother stood and explained that her son wanted to audition. She spoke respectfully, hoping he would listen. The director crossed his arms and looked at the boy from head to toe. His expression made it clear he didn't expect much. Then, with a slight laugh, he said to the students nearby, "If he can play the piano, I'll bow right here in this hall." The students burst into laughter. The boy felt his chest tighten. His mother pressed her lips together, trying not to react. She held her son's hand gently, silently telling him to stay calm. The director, still amused, motioned for them to follow him. He led them down a hallway to a room with an old piano in the corner. It wasn't the academy's best piano. It looked like something they kept for emergencies, or for students who didn't matter much. Still, the boy didn't mind. He was used to practicing on something far worse. The students who overheard followed behind, some taking out their phones, ready to record. They wanted to capture what they expected to be a funny moment. The boy walked to the piano slowly. Each step felt heavy. He could hear the director talking behind him, joking with the teacher about how auditions were usually more exciting than this. But the boy didn't look back. He stood in front of the piano for a moment. It looked dusty and slightly out of tune, but it was still a real piano. He placed his hand on the wooden top and took a breath. He could feel his heart beating fast. His mother stood quietly near the door. Her eyes stayed on him, filled with trust. She didn't worry about the laughter or the director's words. She only cared that her son had this moment. The boy sat on the bench. It creaked under his weight. He placed his fingers on the keys. They felt cold at first, but slowly warmed under his hands. He closed his eyes for a second. In his mind, he could hear the melody he had practiced for months. He remembered the long nights when the electricity went out, and he played the keyboard with a small battery-powered lamp. He remembered how he had to imagine what a real piano would sound like, because the keyboard didn't have the right tones. He thought of all the times he wanted to give up but didn't, not because someone forced him, but because music made him feel alive. He opened his eyes and looked at the keys. The director tapped his shoe impatiently. The students waited, some still smiling, expecting him to freeze. But the boy took a breath, steadying his hands. He pushed down the first key. A clear note filled the room. Surprised him at first, not because he didn't expect sound, but because it was full and warm, so different from the broken keyboard at home. It felt like the piano was finally giving him the voice he always dreamed of. He played the next few notes, shaping the melody slowly, letting his fingers find the rhythm he knew so well. The students' laughter softened. The director stopped tapping his shoe. The boy didn't look at anyone. He didn't need to. He let the music guide him, note by note, emotion by emotion. The room seemed to fade. The only thing that mattered was the piano. Behind him. The students grew quiet. A few lowered their phones. They weren't expecting this. The director leaned slightly forward, his amused expression fading. The mother clasped her hands together. Her eyes were shining. She had always known what her son could do, but seeing him on a real piano filled her with overwhelming pride. The melody grew smoother as the boy continued. His fingers danced across the keys. Every sound felt honest, like it came from a place deep inside him. The room, which moments earlier was full of laughter and doubt, slowly shifted into silence. For the first time that day, the boy felt calm. The piano wasn't judging him. The keys didn't care about his clothes or where he came from. They only cared about the music, and he gave them everything he had. The room had gone quiet, but the boy didn't notice. He was lost inside the music, letting every note flow from his hands as if the piano had been waiting for him all along. The old wooden bench no longer felt uncomfortable. The dusty piano no longer felt neglected. In his mind, it became something alive, something that understood him more than words ever could. As the melody continued, the boy felt his confidence growing. The rhythm settled into his fingers like a familiar friend. He remembered practicing the same tune hundreds of times at home, sometimes until his mother had to remind him it was late. Those memories shaped every move he made now. It felt almost magical, as if all those long nights had led to this very moment. Behind him, the students who had followed to watch him fail stood completely still. A few of them had their mouths slightly open, and others glanced at each other, unsure of what they were witnessing. This was nothing like what they expected. They came hoping for a joke, something light to laugh about. But instead, they found themselves listening to a sound they didn't know someone like him could create. One girl near the back slowly put her phone down. She had been recording, waiting for him to embarrass himself, but now she couldn't keep filming because she didn't want to disturb the moment. She looked at the piano keys, then at the boy's hands, then back to her friends, who were equally stunned. Closer to the front, the director stood with his hands behind his back. Not long ago, he had laughed loudly in front of everyone, confident in his judgment. He had seen countless auditions over the years, and could usually predict within seconds who had real talent. But this boy, with his simple clothes and quiet presence, had made him question everything. The director didn't move. He watched the boy carefully, noticing every shift in tempo, every detail in his technique. His face, which earlier showed amusement, now carried a mix of confusion, surprise, and something else, maybe even respect. The melody gently reached a softer point, flowing like a breeze through the room. The boy leaned into the keys, his expression calm and focused. He wasn't playing to impress anyone. He wasn't thinking about the students behind him or the director who doubted him. He wasn't playing to prove a point. He was simply doing what he loved, and that honesty carried through each note. Near the door, his mother stood with her hands clasped together. She didn't say a word. She didn't want to interrupt even with a whisper. She only watched, her heart swelling with pride. All the years of struggle, All the time she had worked extra hours so he could buy second-hand music sheets. All the sacrifices she made, they were beginning to make sense. The boy shifted to a more emotional part of the melody. His fingers pressed harder, the notes vibrating deeply across the room. The sound filled every corner, from the walls to the ceiling, making the small space feel larger. The students felt it in their chests. The director blinked a few times, trying to understand how a child with no formal training could create something with such depth. The boy's breathing slowed. His mind drifted back to moments that shaped him. He remembered sitting by the window during rainy nights, listening to drops hitting the roof while he practiced. He remembered how he used to pretend the broken keyboard was a grand piano, imagining how the keys should feel and how the melodies should sound. He remembered the encouragement from his mother, the only person who believed in him, even when everything else seemed impossible. With every memory, the music grew richer. Finally, the melody softened again, sliding gently into its final sequence. The boy took a small breath and let his fingers finish the last few notes, each one fading slowly like a quiet goodbye. The final note hung in the air. Then came silence. For a few long seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the room itself needed time to understand what had just happened. The boy finally lifted his hands from the keys. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of what he had just poured out. He looked at the piano for a moment, then slowly turned around, and what he saw startled him. Every student stood still, their expressions blank with shock. A few looked embarrassed, unable to meet his eyes. Others looked amazed. Some even looked confused, as if they needed someone to explain how this was possible. The director seemed frozen. His mouth was slightly open, and his eyes stared at the boy as if he wasn't sure whether to speak or stay silent. He had seen talented children before, but something about this felt different. It wasn't just skill. It was emotion, connection, honesty, things that couldn't be taught. The boy blinked a few times, unsure of what to do. He wasn't used to attention, and this kind of silence made him nervous. He lowered his gaze and stood from the bench, rubbing his palms together. His mother took a small step forward, but she didn't want to rush in and ruin the stillness. She wanted her son to have space, to feel the moment fully. Finally, one of the students cleared their throat softly. It wasn't a laugh or a mockery. It was something more respectful, almost gentle. Another student, without thinking, whispered, "How? How did he do that?" The director looked at the boy with a serious expression, his earlier joke replaying in his mind. The words he had proudly said about bowing in the hall made him feel strange now. He didn't expect to be proven wrong in front of everyone. More importantly, he didn't expect to feel humbled. He slowly stepped forward, each footstep quiet but meaningful. The students moved aside, creating a small path between him and the boy. The boy looked up, slightly confused. He didn't know if he had done something wrong or something right. He only knew that everyone was staring. The director stood just a few steps away from him, his eyes not as sharp as before. He took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle. The boy felt his heart pounding again, just like before he started playing, but this time for a completely different reason. The director finally spoke, his voice softer than anyone had heard from him that day. "Play one more piece," he said. It wasn't an order. It wasn't even a request. It sounded almost like a plea. The students glanced at each other. Some gasped quietly. No one expected the director to ask for more. The boy hesitated. He felt unsure, but he nodded slowly. His mother gave him a reassuring smile, silently telling him he could do it. He sat down again. The bench creaked softly, just like before. He placed his hands on the keys, feeling their warmth now, and before anyone could blink, he began to play again. This time, the students didn't record. They didn't whisper. They didn't laugh. They listened, and the director listened too, not as a judge, not as a critic, but as someone finally seeing the truth right in front of him. The boy played with grace, with passion, with honesty. And with each note, he changed the way the entire room saw him. By the time he reached the end of the second piece, there was no doubt left, not in the hearts of the students, not in the mind of the director, and not in the eyes of his mother. Something incredible had begun. The room felt different now, as if the air had changed. When the boy finished the second piece, the silence that followed was heavier than before. It wasn't the same silence of disbelief. It was something warmer, something filled with respect and wonder. Even the lights in the small room felt softer, almost as if they too were listening. The boy slowly lifted his hands from the piano again. His fingers trembled a little, not from fear, but from the passion he had poured into the music. He swallowed, unsure what to do next. He didn't know if he had played well enough, or if he had made a mistake somewhere. But one thing he knew for certain. He had given everything he had. He turned slightly and saw the director standing there, looking at him with an expression that didn't match his strict reputation. The director's face showed deep thought, almost as if he was trying to understand the boy, not judge him. Behind him, the students were no longer whispering. They were simply watching. Some looked touched by what they had heard. Others still looked confused, struggling to accept that someone they had laughed at moments earlier could play like that. The boy took a small breath and slowly stood up from the bench. He felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. His mother looked at him with wide, emotional eyes. She wanted to run to him, hug him tightly, tell him how proud she was. But she held herself back, wanting to give him space. The director stepped forward again, his shoes lightly tapping the floor. The boy straightened his back, not wanting to appear nervous even though his heart was pounding. The director stopped just a step away from him and looked straight into his eyes. The room stayed quiet. Even the students held their breath without realizing it. "What is your name?" the director asked softly. His voice didn't carry any of the sharpness it had earlier. It lacked the arrogance he showed before. Instead, it carried something gentle. The boy said his name quietly, barely above a whisper. His voice trembled, but the director listened carefully, as if it were the most important sound in the room. "Where did you learn to play like this?" the director asked. The boy glanced down at his hands, unsure how to answer. He didn't want to sound dramatic or proud. He simply told the truth. "At home," he said, "on a small keyboard." Many keys did not work. The students behind him exchanged looks. Some of them trained with expensive teachers. Some practiced on pianos worth more than a car. But this boy, he learned on something broken. The director blinked slowly. It wasn't pity he felt, it was admiration. "And no one taught you?" the director asked. The boy shook his head gently. "I watched lessons online sometimes. When internet worked," he said quietly. The director let out a slow breath, almost as if the truth was heavier than he expected. The boy stood still, waiting for the director to speak again. He didn't know if this was good or bad. He had never auditioned before. He didn't know the rules or the proper way to behave. He only knew how to play. The director finally turned to the students and said, "Everyone, step outside for a moment." There was a small wave of murmurs. None of them expected to be dismissed like that. But the director's tone was calm, yet firm, and they respected him enough to listen. One by one, the students left the room, glancing back at the boy before stepping out the door. Soon, only the boy, his mother, and the director remained. The director closed the door gently. He didn't slam it or rush. He closed it with respect, as though wanting to give the boy a safe space. He turned back to the mother and said, "Ma'am, may I speak with you and your son for a moment?" The mother nodded and stepped closer. The director looked at the boy again. "I want to understand how long you have been playing." The boy thought for a moment. "Since I was 7, he replied quietly. "But only when I had time, and when the keyboard worked." The director nodded slowly. He could see the truth in the boy's posture, in his humble voice, in his unpolished clothes. The talent he had just heard wasn't something that came from luxury or privilege. It came from heart. The director walked to the piano and touched the keys lightly, almost thoughtfully. Then he looked at the boy again. "You played with feeling," he said softly. "Not just skill. Feeling is something even trained players struggle to show." The boy didn't know what to say. He only lowered his gaze. The director took a deep breath and continued, "I said something earlier. Something foolish." The boy blinked. His mother raised her eyes. "I said I would bow in the hall if you could play," the director said. "I made that promise thinking you couldn't do it." He paused for a moment. "But you did." The boy felt his heart skip. The director wasn't smiling, but his face carried honesty. A strange honesty the boy hadn't seen in adults often. The director stepped back from the piano and gently motioned toward the hallway outside. "I intend to keep my word," he said. The mother widened her eyes. The boy's mouth parted slightly. The director walked to the door and opened it. The students who had been waiting outside turned quickly, surprised to see him again. The director walked into the hallway. His posture remained straight, and he didn't look embarrassed or forced. He looked determined. The students watched as he stood in the center of the hall. The boy and his mother followed behind him slowly, unsure of what was about to happen. Then, in the middle of the hall, the director faced the boy, and he bowed. Not a small nod. Not a quick gesture. He bowed deeply. The students gasped loudly. Some covered their mouths. Others blinked rapidly, trying to understand if they were really seeing this. The boy felt frozen. He never imagined a respected director would bow to him. A boy no one believed in. The director held the bow for a few seconds before straightening up. He then spoke loudly enough for every student to hear. "This boy," he said with a calm but firm voice, "may not look like what you expect, but he has trained harder than many of you, and he played with more heart than most musicians do in a lifetime." No one dared to argue. The director paused, then added, "From today forward, you will treat him with respect." The hall stayed silent. The boy didn't know if he should smile or stay quiet. He felt overwhelmed. His mother had tears in her eyes, trying hard not to cry in front of everyone. The director looked at her and said gently, "Ma'am, please come to my office. I have something important to discuss with you both." The mother nodded slowly. The boy followed silently, still shocked. As they walked down the hallway, the students moved aside respectfully, giving the boy space he had never been given before. Whispers followed, but they were no longer mocking. They were words of admiration, surprise, and disbelief. The boy kept walking quietly, still trying to understand everything that had happened. He didn't know what the director wanted to discuss. He didn't know what this meant for his future. He only knew one thing: something had changed forever. The boy and his mother followed the director down a quiet hallway, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. The sounds of the students' whispers faded as they moved farther from the hall. The boy's heart still raced from the unexpected bow, and he felt a mixture of nervousness and curiosity about what happened next. He had never been in a place where a grown man, someone respected by so many, had shown him such respect. The director opened the door to his office and gestured for them to enter. The room was large and filled with books, sheets of music, and a few framed certificates on the wall. It felt like a space where decisions were made, where people's futures could be shaped. The boy and his mother stepped inside cautiously, unsure of what was coming, The director closed the door behind them and turned toward them. For a moment, he simply looked at the boy. It was not a look of judgment or critique, but a look of understanding, like he was trying to see the boy's journey in one glance. "You have talent," the director said quietly. "Talent is not always easy to find, and it is even rarer to see it in someone so young who has had so few opportunities." The boy nodded quietly, unsure how to respond. He had been told he was talented many times, but hearing it from someone like this felt different. It felt important. "I want to help you," the director continued. "I want to make sure your talent does not go to waste." The boy's eyes widened. He had always dreamed of attending a proper music academy, of learning from real teachers with real instruments. But he never thought someone of the director's status would offer to help him directly. "What do you mean?" the mother asked gently, her voice cautious. She had learned to protect her son from disappointment, to keep her hopes from rising too high. The director walked around his desk and sat down in a chair, motioning for them to take seats opposite him. He leaned forward slightly, as if trying to emphasize the importance of his words. "I am offering him a full scholarship," the director said. "He will have access to the best teachers, the best instruments, and the chance to perform in real concerts. All expenses covered." The boy's mouth opened slightly, and his mother blinked rapidly. She had expected opportunities, maybe a few private lessons, but a full scholarship at this academy was more than she could have imagined. Her heart swelled with a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief. I don't know what to say," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "You don't need to say anything now," the director replied. "All I ask is that you continue to play with honesty and dedication, the way you did today." The boy nodded, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He had always played for the love of music, but knowing someone of this authority believed in him gave his heart a new sense of purpose. The director then turned to the mother. "I also want to speak with you about supporting him in this journey. I know it will require commitment, time, and effort from both of you, but I believe it will be worth it." The mother smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "I will do whatever it takes," she said firmly. She had worked hard to get him this far already, and now she would do whatever was needed to help him reach his full potential. The director nodded approvingly. "Good. Then we will start with lessons tomorrow. He will be assigned a teacher who is among the best in the academy. He will also have access to a private practice room. I want him to be able to focus entirely on improving his skills without any distractions." The boy could hardly believe what he was hearing. All the hours he had spent at home, practicing on a broken keyboard, had led to this moment. Now he would have a real piano to play, proper instruction, and the chance to grow in a way he had only imagined in his dreams. The director continued, "You have something rare. Most children do not have the patience or the dedication to practice as much as you do. That is what makes your talent special. But raw talent alone is not enough. You need guidance and you need support. That is what we will provide." The boy nodded again, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He wanted to do his best, to show that the director's trust was not misplaced. He also wanted to make his mother proud. She had sacrificed so much for him, and he wanted her to see that it had been worth it. The director stood and walked toward the door. "I want to introduce him properly to the rest of the academy," he said. "Tomorrow there will be a small recital. It is not a performance for an audience, but a chance for the teachers and students to see what he can do. I want everyone to understand the potential that exists here." The boy felt a little nervous at the thought of performing in front of so many people, but he also felt ready. For the first time, he realized that he belonged in this place, not because of luck or chance, but because of the hours he had dedicated to music and the passion he carried within him. The mother reached out and took his hand. "You are ready," she whispered. I am so proud of you." The boy squeezed her hand gently. He felt a mixture of gratitude, nervousness, and excitement. He was stepping into a world he had only dreamed about, and he understood that everything from this point forward would be different. The director returned to his desk and looked at both of them with a serious expression. "Remember," he said, "this is just the beginning. The journey will not always be easy, but if you continue with the same dedication and honesty you showed today, there is no limit to what you can achieve." The boy nodded solemnly. He understood that this opportunity was not something to take lightly. It was a chance to grow, to learn, and to share his music with others. The mother smiled and whispered to him again, "You are going to do amazing things." As they left the office, the boy felt a sense of purpose he had never felt before. The academy, the teachers, the instruments, they were all part of a new chapter in his life. The doubts and laughter of the students from earlier seemed distant now. What mattered was that he had been seen, truly seen, for his talent and his dedication. The boy looked at the piano in his mind, imagining the melodies he would play and the new skills he would learn. He felt excitement building within him. Tomorrow would be the start of something extraordinary, and he was ready to embrace it. He walked out of the office with his mother by his side, knowing that the journey ahead would challenge him, inspire him, and ultimately shape him into the musician he was destined to become. The boy had taken his first real step into a future filled with possibilities, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, the boy woke early, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today was the day he would meet his teacher for the first time and begin his journey in the academy. He had slept little, his mind replaying the events of the previous day, the bow, the director's words, and the promise of a scholarship. Now, everything felt real. He carefully dressed in his simple but clean clothes. His mother watched him with quiet pride. She had prepared breakfast, but the boy barely touched it, his mind focused on the music waiting for him. As they walked toward the academy, the sun rose softly, casting a warm light over the streets. The world felt full of promise. Inside the academy, the students and teachers were already gathered in small groups, whispering about the boy. Some were curious, some still skeptical, but all were eager to see the talent that had surprised everyone the day before. When he entered, heads turned, and silence spread like a wave. Even the students who had previously laughed couldn't help but look at him with newfound respect. The director met him at the entrance and smiled. "Today is the start of something important," he said. "Follow me." They walked down the hall to a private room where a piano stood, polished and ready. The boy approached it cautiously, placing his hands on the keys. The feeling was different from the old piano he had practiced on at home. The keys were smooth, responsive, and perfect. He could feel the difference immediately, and his heart raced with excitement. His teacher entered quietly. She was a calm, kind woman with an air of confidence. She smiled at him and introduced herself. "I've heard about your talent," she said softly. "I look forward to helping you grow." The boy nodded politely, unsure what to say. He was both nervous and excited. The teacher gestured for him to sit at the piano, and he obeyed. He took a deep breath, placing his hands on the keys, and began to play. This time, he felt the music flowing through him even more freely, encouraged by the support and environment around him. The teacher listened closely, nodding occasionally. She gave gentle advice, correcting his posture, helping him with finger placement, and suggesting new techniques. The boy absorbed every word, eager to learn. For the first time, he could practice without worrying about broken keys or makeshift melodies. He could focus entirely on improving. Days turned into weeks. Every day, he practiced for hours, sometimes alone, sometimes under the guidance of his teacher. The academy provided him with lessons in music theory, composition, and performance. Each day he learned something new, and his confidence grew. He began to understand music in ways he never had before. Each note became more meaningful, each melody more expressive. His classmates started to change their attitude toward him. Those who had laughed at him before began to seek his advice. They asked him about the pieces he played and how he had learned so much on his own. The boy remained humble, sharing what he knew but never boasting. He had learned that music was not about proving himself to others. It was about expressing what he felt inside. Soon, the academy held a small recital. It was not a public event, but it was attended by teachers, students, and a few invited guests. The boy's mother was allowed to sit in the back, her heart beating fast. The boy felt nervous again, but he also felt ready. He had worked hard, learned a lot, and now it was time to show what he could do. When it was his turn, he walked onto the small stage and sat at the grand piano. The lights were soft, and the room was quiet. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and let his fingers find the keys. Then he began to play. The music that flowed from the piano was unlike anything anyone had expected. It was powerful, emotional, and full of life. Each note seemed to tell a story, carrying the feelings he had experienced, the struggles, the dedication, the dreams, and the hope. The audience was silent, captivated by the depth and beauty of his playing. The director watched from the back, proud and emotional. He had seen many talented musicians, but this boy was extraordinary. It wasn't just skill or technique. It was the honesty, the feeling, and the connection to the music that made him stand out. When the boy finished, the room stayed silent for a moment, as if no one could find the words to respond. Then applause began slowly, growing louder and louder until it filled the room. The boy looked up surprised and saw the smiles on the faces of his classmates, his teachers, and his mother. The director stepped forward and applauded warmly. "You have done something remarkable," he said. "You have shown us what true talent and dedication look like." The boy's mother rushed forward and hugged him tightly. "I am so proud of you," she whispered. Tears ran down her cheeks. She had watched him grow from a boy practicing on a broken keyboard to a young musician capable of moving hearts with his music. Over the next months, the boy continued to thrive at the academy. He performed in recitals, collaborated with other students, and learned more advanced techniques. Each performance built his confidence, and each lesson deepened his understanding of music. The boy's reputation grew, and he became a source of inspiration for other students who faced challenges. Despite his growing success, the boy remained humble. He remembered the days when he practiced in silence at home, when the keyboard didn't work properly, and when few believed in him. Those memories kept him grounded, reminding him that talent was meaningful only when paired with dedication and heart. Teachers and students alike began to notice the boy's natural ability to touch people through his music. They realized it wasn't just about playing notes correctly, it was about conveying emotion, telling stories without words, and connecting with listeners in a way that few could. The director, once skeptical, now became one of the boy's greatest supporters. He often introduced the boy at events, telling the story of the day he had promised to bow in the hall. "This boy," he would say, "reminded me that true talent knows no boundaries. His dedication, his honesty, and his heart have shown us what is possible." The boy never forgot that day, nor the journey that had brought him to the academy. He continued to practice, learn, and grow, always remembering the people who had believed in him and the struggles he had overcome. Years later, the boy performed in larger halls, in front of bigger audiences. But no matter how famous or accomplished he became, he always carried the same dedication and love for music that had first brought him to the academy. Each performance remained human, heartfelt, and genuine. He knew that it wasn't just about playing the piano. It was about sharing a part of himself, about inspiring others, and about proving that with determination, passion, and support, even the most unlikely dreams could come true. The boy had started his journey with an old, broken keyboard at home and a hope that someone would see him for who he truly was. Now he had become a musician whose music moved hearts, whose story inspired others, and whose life proved that talent combined with perseverance could overcome any obstacle. And as he looked out at the audience, he remembered the first day, the laughter, the doubt, the director's bow, and he knew that every moment, every struggle, every note had led him to this point. His journey was far from over, but he had already achieved something extraordinary. He had shown the world that a humble beginning could lead to greatness when guided by passion, honesty, and love for what you do.